I actually received a replay recently, in which I want to kind of go into. In which it's another TVT. TVT is actually one of my favorite matchups because for a long time it was a standard saying that tanks are the only way to play, and tanks are really, really good in that matchup, but I don't think they're the clinch unit for that matchup. There's many ways to go around it to circumvent the problem, and more, and even in the GSL, most recently, Boxer had a very interesting answer, which is a style that I highly like, which is doing Marauder bombs and running around the army and eventually tacking up to BCs. Going straight for BCs is a bad idea, but I love when Terrans are able to go that BC route to end the game. But these two players, Outplayed is who we're going to mainly be looking at, playing as the Red Terran, and then Nancat is the person who submitted the replay. Nancat isn't a Terran player in the slightest, so he was just kind of dicking around, and looking at his match history, he was very much dicking around by like worker rushing people and everything else. So even though he was just having fun with it, Outplayed, I assume, was playing a much more serious game. So I just want to look at some key things that he does. He kind of telegraphed right away to Nancat that he was going to do an aggressive expansion, so we have a 1x CC, and then immediately double gassing. This is a very popular play to do. I even do it on big maps such as Shakura's Plateau. On smaller maps, it's a little more risky because it's smaller distances to each other for you to get hit with early Marines right away and everything else. So that's one of the weaknesses right now. Also another, it's not really popular, but if you go very fast one-base Hellions, especially once you scout that information, that Nancat could easily transition from here and get blue flame Hellions. If you started a reactor, you could have swapped that. Getting a reactor is actually more standard play, but that's fine. But fast Hellions is actually very annoying to a rack CC build because Hellions are extremely quick to run across the entire map, and usually if you're getting a fast CC, you aren't powering up, getting your factory units and everything else, so all you have are Marines basically to hold it off. And if you have reactor Hellions, that's going to demolish a lot of Marines, in which then usually the best case scenario to do is to go up your ramp and just kind of bunker up either here, or if just to bunker up here and hopefully that the Hellions don't run by. That makes your Marines last a lot longer versus those Hellions, and is a big deterrent for those Hellions to even try to break up the ramp. But effectively that's the only thing you really can do. Since if you get assaulted with about 6 red flame Hellions, even just having 8 Marines, that's not going to do a whole lot because it takes 3 shots. Yeah, 3 shots to kill the Marine, and I mean you effectively have 6 Hellions. So if there's any lining up action, like this is a perfect lineup. I mean that's just 3 shots right there from 3 Hellions, and you're done. And then you stop this expansion, in which then this 1 Rax expand is actually behind. But that's not what happens. I'm just pointing out a weakness in the build, and right now we do even have that bunker down in case Hellions were coming. And Outplayed didn't get too much information. He even burned a scan to see that all he had was this starport going on. Nancat actually lifted up the factory. That's why the Outplayed vision, it's disappeared. Just to kind of feign that he wasn't going to do this Banshee build. Oop, and I've gone way too far because I was powering through this. So after he scans, are we going to see him scan again? Because I mainly just want to point out scouting information. Let's go back further before he even built this eBay, since I more want to look at the points in the build in which Outmatch uses his scouting information to make decisions, because that's the most important thing, not only in mirror matches but in every match, to use that scouting information. And when I'm helping at lower levels, that's the biggest thing I hear of, like, well, I scouted their base but I didn't know how to translate that information. So we should see the scan very shortly. right now. So we have this scanned information of like, oh crap, he's probably going Banshees because that is an extremely popular build, in which I'll actually talk about later and doing in TVT. And he hasn't built this engineering bay. Let's wait. Let's see how long it takes him to react to build this engineering bay. And right now, Outplayed is actually floating quite a bit of money. So let's slow it down, not to times 4. So about at 550, it took him 5 seconds to respond saying, I need an engineering bay, and this is how he's going to defend it. Scanning at that time is a kind of standard timing for any Terran to do, and it was around like the 550 mark, to see if they are going the Banshee route or really anything else. So he's sacrificing a mule to get that information of how to respond accordingly to not die effectively. We're also going to see Outplayed keep his energy relatively high to keep scans. This is a very hard counter to a Cloaked Banshee. So if Nancat did actually change his build, that would be very problematic. But as we can see from the production tab and everything else, Nancat doesn't actually get Cloak. So this isn't too bad, and Outplayed could be considered, he's not overreacting yet, but soon he will be, once his energy gets super high, and I think he just stays on the one turret at each base, which isn't too bad. So that's really the only interesting part. Nan is going to get some kills, but nobody cares about that, and then the Vikings run him around. And so Outplayed took that information, he did a 1-Rax, fast expand, and then he says, okay, what do I need to defend against? Because effectively, if someone's attacking, well, the triangularity theory that I have for StarCraft 2 is attack beats powering up beats defense, and defense beats attacking. And so Outplayed is doing a powering up build. He's extremely weak early game. So all he needs to do then is defend. Can you see? No, you can't see my hands. Haha. So all Outplayed needs to do after he gets his power up, aka his command center up really fast, is just to not die. As soon as he doesn't die and defends any attack, then he can effectively go into his next step. That's why he scans at 550, that's why he builds the turrets, and that's why he goes to Vikings, and Vikings are a crucial unit in TVT anyways. So even if he scanned and saw that a big tank push was coming, he would have responded extremely different. He probably wouldn't have gotten that eBay up that fast, and he probably would try to even get double factory and make his own tanks, or to try to even get Banshees or some other crazy concoction. There's many things to do, but even a fast CC, a fast siege tank push is actually extremely difficult to hold off if you get out of position for a split second, because he's powering up on one base to get siege tech faster than you. Usually he's going to be ahead of you by about 40 seconds, so that's the tight window that you have. I'm lagging somewhat. Awesome. And so that's something to also consider in CC, and I'm like branching out so much since I only watch this replay once and I have very minimal notes that I'm following. But effectively, Outplayed just needs to stay alive around until about, I would say about like the 9 to 10 minute mark, and then he feels safe for defending, and then he's going to go in and get more scouting information to see, is my opponent now weak? Did he take that early expansion because he stayed on one base for so long and effectively just go kill him? Or do I need to still defend and hold off another big push? Or can I even just expand and get like so far ahead of him it's not even going to be funny? Right now, just looking at the resources, Outplayed is kind of banking a lot of minerals. He probably could be taking a third expansion up relatively fast, or getting more tech structures. What we're going to see is he's going to go into a 3-factory play, so a pure mech style TVT, which is extremely powerful endgame as long as you start getting those weapon upgrades. So let's look at Outplayed's vision very quickly. He doesn't know that Mikomi has started to move out. He didn't have any information of a second command center, which is now dropped. This I would kind of say is a minor error, but Outplayed is going to start using this Viking to effectively check any Banshees or dropships even that might try to circumvent down kind of this back alleyway. And yeah, I would label this as actually a failure. He poked in here, but usually he needed to poke in a little bit more to try to get a good understanding of the unit composition to see what he needs to do to counter it. And usually by the numbers, if he's low on numbers, it usually means Mikomi is powering up by getting additional tech, or it could also mean that his army is in a very different place, which if Outplayed is playing very poorly, he can just get swiped and lose the game outright. But during this time, Outplayed is just teching up for Blue Flame Hellions because he was spotting a lot of Marines early on. And right now, Nankat does have 16 Marines, so this Blue Flame effectively just cuts that in half in an instant. While the siege tanks are about even. That's actually not too big of a deal. But the biggest thing for the build, since Outplayed actually wasn't checked or damaged at all from his fast command center play, he's now like leagues ahead, as now we start seeing around the 13-minute mark, and it even started before then, that he started getting ahead in supply. Since he has more SCVs, he's able to mine more. He has now 2 mules versus the one that Nankat was on for a while. And so he can just have a lot more options of what to go to and just get really huge to just go kill him. We do have a little drop of Nankat. It's not too bad. Outmatched, counter responds accordingly, and this is where Outplayed is going to actually start stopping everything from Nankat, is by using these Vikings to control this outer space. Usually you can even just set 2 Vikings around your perimeters just to go on patrol back and forth, and that'll catch any dropships. It usually will deter them completely, and you still have about a 50% chance to kill it outright before any unit drops, especially if they're not paying attention. Now this is a very crucial moment of how you're going to engage in your attack. There's many ways of like, okay, my build is going to to expand, to get 3 factories up, get a lot of mech, but what am I going to do with that? Yeah, you can defend really well because you have a bunch of siege tanks, and yeah, if he pushes up with a lot of kind of bio, the Hellions are going to slaughter any Marines, in which then all he would have are Marauders if he's going pure bio. And so now he has to say, am I going to push up your front? Which he actually scans first and says, no, but I have air dominance. This is the decision making that went through. He's like, I have 8 Vikings. Does he have 8? He has actually 9 Vikings. Critical number is around 8 Vikings in TVT. But he has complete air control right now, and just 1 medevac, and that's all it takes, to say, if all of your units are right here at the natural, that means you're probably completely wide open at the side or the back of your base. And so what he's going to do is, as we'll see, he's going to start sieging up siege tanks at the bottom of this cliff, and then slowly start to elevator up more siege tanks. This is going to force Nankat to pull back all of his forces and effectively make his front line completely open. And unfortunate for Nankat, he had unit positioning structures in line of these siege tanks that were even on the bottom. And here's our first elevator up of just 2 siege tanks, but this is extremely powerful since Outplayed can now use his Vikings to spot these tanks while Nankat has to burn scans. What Nankat could have also tried to do in this situation, because he was getting those barracks just kind of pelted. Oh, never mind, I was going to be really stupid. I was going to say you can try to use bunkers or your barracks to spot, but he has air control, so you can't do that in that situation. Vikings are really important. They're not a key unit because you can still lose if you overproduce Vikings, which is extremely sad way to die. But Vikings are important. Nancat obviously doesn't die from this push, as we'll see, but Outplayed just starts getting such a huge lead that it's extremely hard for Nancat to ever get back in this game. During this attack, you're putting your opponent on the back foot. So, as I stated before, that powering up beats defense, defense beats offense, and offense beats powering up. If you're attacking your opponent, he's now on the defense. So the logical next step is to beat his defense, which is to power up. And as we can see, as soon as Outplayed feels pretty comfortable with this kind of, I'm going to call it a soft contain, but it's borderlining on a hard contain. If he built some turrets around here and started to really reinforce this position, I would call it a hard contain, but right now I'm calling it a soft contain. And we're actually going to see Outplayed try to push up here, which I think is a mistake, but we're overlooking that. During all of that high aggression, that big timing push of the Blue Flame and the Siege Tank, he's powering up. He's taking a third. This is effectively saying, okay, Makomi, or okay, Nancat, you might, why did I say Makomi? I've been talking to him too much. Anyway, okay, Nancat, if you're going to hold this off with your high defense to stop my offense, well, I'm not going to reinforce my offense, but what I'm going to do is power up for the third kind of triangle in the triangularity theory, in which then, even if you stop my offense with your defense and we have even like an equal trade, I'm going to have so much more economy or so much more upgrades than you for my second push, my follow-up push, that you're just going to get crushed. And Outplayed does this extremely well all game, and he even is extremely patient. And that's what, I think he's almost too patient in this game. But that's what I thought was extremely good about this game that I really wanted to just kind of talk about it if no one was in the On My Face chat, which no one really knew has. As I stated before, I watch replays on too high of speeds. I really have to stop that. But obviously you're going to see that all this shit is dead. Okay, now speed it up. So this is effectively a dual-pronged attack. Why I don't like this is because Outplayed knows that siege tanks are right here in this position. So effectively, these two can cover up half of this ramp. And if you're trying to break a ramp with really fat units, like siege tanks and even Hellions are considered a fat unit, you're going to start, even a fourth of these units are going to get pelted. I also don't like that he just kind of A-moved rather than try to kite him up immediately, because this one bunker bottlenecks this, and all these tanks get really confused and don't know what to do. Outplayed also is well aware, if looking at his vision, that Nancat has a ton of Marauders. He doesn't know if they have stim, which they do, but trying to break pure mech and tanks, which are effectively panzers in this scenario, all Nancat has to do is take these Marauders, stim them down, kill all of this with minimal losses, and the attack is completely thwarted. And that's exactly what we're going to see once I move it up to faster. These tanks are pelting about a fourth of his army. Now Outplayed is hugging this. Marauders stim. Take out everything and losing 4 Marauders. 4 Marauders for all of those tanks and all of those Hellions. Not a good trade at all. Now if Outplayed was able to start moving up here more to force his Marauders and other siege tanks to go closer to his command center, that frontal push would have been better, but this is just too big of a key position for Outplayed to think to do that. And we're moving on. My biggest criticism is Outplayed just stores up way too much energy on every single one of his command centers. That's my biggest problem right now, and that he has way more minerals than he should. And so ultimately, we're getting to the good part. Outplay is going to continue trying to do that contain of a lot of siege tanks, and he already has +1 on his infantry, and +1 on tanks is huge, since effectively they're the biggest, stronger multiplier of those +1 upgrades in the entire game. And so Outplayed, what he needs to do is actually control this tower. He should have had a Hellion out here. But he's just going to control the center of the map as, that's right, he expands again. He's taking a 4th base to Nankat's almost 3rd. So Outplayed is always ahead. Nankat seems to try to be moving around, trying to circumvent the entire army, which is the biggest flaw of mech, is that it's extremely hard to maneuver around. But we're actually going to have Nankat just say, you know what, I am pretty sure I can break this middle position, and he's going to panzer up, dart in here, and just take all this out. Even though it looks like Nankat took an even trade here, or actually had a beneficial trade here, Outplayed all of his bases is just going to hold this off. He had so many tanks here, and he only actually moved about half his tanks, probably even less, to stop this entire aggression. And since there's no more medevacs, these Marauders can't really push on because Outplayed has so much air control with all those Vikings. So even though Nankat says, alright, I stopped his 3rd, he doesn't even know about Outplayed's 4th right now, which is even protected by a planetary fortress if a drop was to come. And if you dropped here, it wouldn't hit, but that's another story. Nankat tried another drop, don't really care. Outplayed has information that Nankat is getting this 3rd, whoop-de-doo. I say like whoop-de-doo and I'm not enthused by it because to me it's all fairly standard play. At this point, he tries to take the center again. This is actually a pretty bad position. As soon as because all these tanks are right behind the brush, so as soon as he left the Zelnaga tower, he doesn't see anything. If he had 1 unit in front of the brush, that's good. Now, if you were Zerg and you were just hiding behind the brush because most of your units are melee, that's good. But these are tanks. These are range 13. So they kind of need that vision, since he's not playing a Zerg, but if a Zerg just kind of rushed in, he would immediately be in tanks, and tanks would be damaging each other through their splash. So positionally, I don't like it, but it's the patience that I just love. I mean, he's essentially maxed out, and he's just comfortably waiting, and even with BCs, he's just kind of chilling around, and it's actually Nankat who starts to be the aggression one, so then Outplayed now has to move. And Nankat will do some damage, but these battle cruisers, which, oh, I actually thought he got 2-2. This is also another funny moment. Right before Nankat decides to GG and gets completely just obliterated by these battle cruisers, he makes a nice little pun. But Outplay's just kind of, okay, I'm really ahead, I have mech, but I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait still for you to make the mistake. And especially if you're going to try to do a longer game, kind of macro style, you don't hope that he makes a mistake, but if a mistake happens, you just completely win the game right then and there. Obviously, Outplayed never wanted to do a straight up kind of tank push, even though he did, but he didn't want to win the game that way. His ultimate goal was to control the middle of the map. Controlling the middle of the map cuts the map in half, and then using his blue flame run-bys, he can spot if Nankat is taking any of these bases, and hopefully he can pick off some of those SCVs to even slow Nankat down even more for Outplayed to then just jump ahead, and now he has 4 bases, taking a 5th, well, Nankat just got this 4th base up. So all game, as soon as Outplayed did his, one racks expand, and then defended off Makomi's Banshee aggression, Nankat was playing catch up for the rest of the game, and Nankat kept making 2 critical errors, which then made Outplay skyrocket way ahead. But I thought that was just kind of a neat replay that was sent to me by Nancat, and just kind of wanted to talk about it. No one really new is on the channel. Looks like we do have a few more people on the channel. What we're doing, we're not just going over replays and everything. I'm just kind of buying time. But if you're a Terran player and you want coaching at any level, we can kind of either watch some of your replays that you send me, just kind of like how I did, or we can watch you play a game and I can say, hey, you really should work on this or that, blah, 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 blah. And just kind of get better at the game. Mainly for Terran. If you're off racing and you want help to beat Terran, that's the only way I'm going to help you. Like, if you come to me saying I need help with PvP, I can guide you the right way, but I don't consider me knowledgeable of that matchup or any of the kind of off-race matchups that we're talking about. Yeah, so since no one really is on, I'm just going to pick... I've had a problem since I cast the CSL games for Purdue University, and I keep seeing this problem over and over again. It's related to playing 2s and a Terran player doing a 3 racks build. I've probably seen about now 4 3 racks in the CSL over the past, I think we've had 8 weeks so far, and none of them I like. I don't think any of them are efficient economically or army-wise, and it just kind of pains me because 3 racks is effectively the Terran standard to a Protoss 4 gate. So if you don't know how to 3 racks, that just shows me that you don't actually know a Terran build's optimization. That's extremely blunt of me to say, of you not knowing any kind of build optimization, but because it's just so simple that actually any new player that comes to me and that they ask me the question, show me a build, this is the build I show them, since it requires extremely low movement of your map, like of your screen map. It's extremely strong timing push, even though it got nerfed a few times, and you can still okay, I'll answer this question in a sec. And with the 3 racks, it still has variations to do more economic 3 racks or do more of an all-in 3 racks. All of Terran builds, why I like playing Terran, is they have so many different variables and variations of which you can go about it. So scouting a Terran is extremely important. But before I do that, what I'm going to answer with this, Fear Dragons says, I have a question about the last game. Doesn't taking more expansions make you more vulnerable to drops from a Biowing player? What advice do you have for Outplay to deal with the issue of multi-prong drops when you get to 4 or 5 bases? I wasn't focusing too much on the drop play. Nancat actually tried about 3 to 4 drops that entire game, and only the first drop did minimal damage, and every single drop was stopped immediately. I probably went really fast over, but in TVT especially, getting Viking control and effectively air dominance, you should be drop proof. Every single time you saw even Outplayed's tanks just kind of sitting around, not doing anything, his Vikings were never actually with that army. He had like maybe 1 or 2 medevacs for just to do elevators later on, but his Vikings were actually spread out to guard the edge of his bases, or even just sitting a little bit in his main or near his natural or the outside of his third to pick off any of those drops and to react to those Vikings. So how you stop a heavy Biowing player who's trying to do a lot of drops, if the Biowing player is making medevacs, he's not making Vikings. So if he's not making Vikings, you should be making Vikings if you don't have air control. As soon as you get air control, you can even leave your Vikings with your main army, but it's even more important to leave 1 to 2 Vikings near the borders of your base. If you don't want to leave the Vikings near the border of your base, you can make the... what's the name of it? I don't... like, I only build this building like... the sensory tower. You build the sensory tower effectively and make a diorama Is it a diagram? Anyway, the big circles at key points where drops can happen. You usually can make the sensory towers when you're taking your third. That's kind of a rule of thumb timing. It can vary. You can do it on 2 base if they're going to try to do heavy drop pressure, like if they opened up with a red flame or blue flame Hellion drop, and they keep trying to do that with then a marine follow-up and blah, 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 blah. You can get an earlier sensory tower. But usually on 3 bases, then you can consider making a sensory tower, and you usually make 2 to guard both kind of your corners. And on most maps, your expansions will make an L at the different various points on the map. So you're effectively covered to see if a drop is coming using sensory towers. But what I like to do in TVT is get that air control with the Vikings, and you just ungroup about 2 to 4 total Vikings, and you just have them on patrol guarding kind of the edges of drops. So that was a good question. The same kind of theory goes with, now that warp prisms are more popular, usually you don't need to do the sensory tower, but having just even that spare Viking can be really annoying. In TVZ, it's a lot harder to do since Vikings are really, really bad as soon as the Zerg player gets Muta play. But usually they don't do drops. Usually it's just straight Muta, so you either just make missile turrets and Thors and Marines effectively to try to stop that rather than trying to go for more of a starport play. And I got a big thanks, so I assume I answered your question to the fullest. So if there's no more questions, I'm actually going to just let's just watch the replay of me doing this, so I don't play and then make a lot of mistakes and then have to restart. So this was just me earlier. I'm not facing any computer at all. I just opened up a game and just said continue with the game. You can also do this trick if you're preparing a build for a tournament. If you don't have a computer opponent and you just play one player, no computers, and you just say continue game, you can practice your entire build. You can still watch the replay to do analysis, but if you go into the build order screen, nothing is shown. So you can actually play multiple games against no one just to refine a build and try to find the optimal kind of settings for it, and then use it live, and your opponents can't look at your history saying like, oh, all he's been doing is practicing a Reaper opening, or oh, all he's doing is practicing a Siege timing push or Banshee push. You can hide that information completely, so just put that feather in your hat if you are planning to do a tournament and you're afraid of your opponents looking at your builds. Now, of course, if you make it past like the first round especially and you get the same matchup, they can look at that match history of what you did against your other opponent, but that's just a neat little trick that you can do. So let's just open this up. You can't even open up the names because there's one player, so that's always a neat thing. But effectively how the 3 racks goes is you get a supply depot, your first racks, you get 3 Marines out of that rack, or I skipped something. Supply depot, racks, gas. You get 3 Marines out of your first barracks. As soon as that happens, you should have about 300 minerals to start 2 more barracks at the exact same time, and then start your reactor on your first barracks. I actually got my gas a little late because I was getting distracted, but this is also another good example of you can make tiny mistakes and the build can still work. So as soon as I actually sent out my scouting SCV after supply depot, that's a personal preference. I do that every matchup, and even though that I'm not playing against anyone, I like to kind of practice moving him around. Since in a live game I'm going to do it, and even I'm using my first Marine to scout popular proxies. This is just something that has just become natural to me because I practice it so much. The 3rd Marine is nearly done. We had 300 minerals. We started both of them at the exact same time, and we started the reactor on the first barracks. Why we do this, to talk about the theory of why we do this. First, if you're doing a very early one base aggression with barracks with Terran's biggest fault with building buildings is it requires an SCV to be there at all times. Now what you're saying, might be thinking is, Zerg, well, you have to sacrifice the drone. But once you sacrifice it, you can remake the drone. This SCV is just tied up for 65 seconds. It takes to build a new worker of any type 17 seconds. So already we're behind on minerals because the SCV is building. And usually you build them at the same time is you have these two SCVs mining a few more minerals first before that sacrifice happens. Because after you have the big bulk of money, you don't need another big bulk of money since you're going to start making units which cost significantly less than the building. So that's the theory of building 2 barracks at the same time, or even if you're doing a 6 racks, which we'll talk about at a different time, you build 5 racks at the exact same time, rather than I have 150 minerals, start my 2nd racks. I have another 150 minerals, start my 3rd racks. That's a not efficient way of doing a 6 racks, and not an efficient way of doing a 3 racks, which is the first mistake I see people do when they're trying to do a 3 racks. Why you start a core first, because we're actually, oh no, what did I hit? Oh crap, stop. I hit something. Alright, anyway, well, my game is doing that. Why you start the reactor first is because the reactor takes 50 seconds while tech labs take 25 seconds. This, I'm going to say, is more of a personal preference. I think it is more efficient, but I can't show you numbers right now to say why it's more efficient. But the reactor takes 50 seconds to make, while the tech lab takes 25 seconds to make. So effectively, you're tying up this barracks. Once you have 3 Marines out, you're tying up this barracks 50 seconds before it can start making 2 Marines at once. Now, if we stopped and built a tech lab, we would tie up the barracks for 25 seconds, but after it's done, we can only go back to making 1 Marine at a time. So if your opponent, Terran player, actually went the reactor first, he's going to start having so much more Marines than you that even if you get a fast combat shield or a slightly faster combat shield or a slightly faster stim, he's going to have more units than you that it won't really matter. And there's problems with getting stim first and not combat shield, but we can talk about that later with more specific matchups. So get the reactor first, because at this point all you want is more units, not upgrades faster. You want units. So the next step, and a very important part that I need to point out with this build that I do, is I never stop SCV production. You always drop mules as soon as you get 50 energy. You always make SCVs, and you stay on one gas until you expand effectively. But making SCVs is the critical point with this type of through racks. There's types of through racks that stop SCV production to then even get a 4th racks. There's other variations to pull all the SCVs, to do an all-in, but I don't like builds where I have to stop SCV production, so I'm not stopping SCV production, and we'll see that as long as you keep up with supply depots, you'll have just enough minerals to do every single step in this build. Another thing to note, this SCV right here, this is what I like to call a union worker. A union worker is defined as an SCV who has one job and one job only. The job of this single SCV is to make supply depots. The trick that I use is as soon as I see that there's one idle SCV, that when the icon pops up, I'll point it out again, all I do is press F1 BS, which is build supply depot, and it immediately jumps on my screen to that one SCV who's the union worker to build the next supply depot, and that's how I never forget to build another supply depot. I do that trick not only with this build, but in every single one of my builds. And even when you're on 2 base and 3 bases, then you should have one union worker per base. So if you're 2 basing, you need 2 SCVs that are constantly building supply depots, in which all you do, you're going to see a SCV turn idle, F1, BS. Another one pops idle, F1, BS. 3 base, same philosophy. 4 base, same philosophy until obviously there's times when you stop your union worker, like if you just lost a lot of units, then using more minerals to get supply for a supply you don't need isn't optimal, so you can send them back to minerals, but remember to look at your supply to say, I need to start building supply depots again. Another point is when you're at 200, clearly you don't need to make more SCVs. Why can't I move this? Anyway, so that's a few notes. As soon as these 2 barracks is complete, we're going to see 2 tech labs start immediately, as well as 2 marines starting immediately. Now, the first thing that, as soon as the tech labs are done, is you start stim first on one, and then combat shield on the other, and usually you have to start 2 marines at each of these barracks. After these marines are done, you actually have to do 2 waves of marines. After these 2 waves are done, then you can start making marauders. You make marauders because not only do they do really well against stalkers, if you're trying a through-X versus a TVT, they do really well versus roaches in a TVZ, and in TVT, I guess if they go tank play, hopefully you can hit the tanks really fast. Those are all very good points for your offense, but what marauders also do is take more damage. They're effectively your tanks, in which your marines are your high DPS units, especially once you get your combat shield and stim up, to then your marines just annihilate everything, and your marauders are there just effectively to take effectively take more damage and to bust bunkers down in TVT a lot more effectively. So we have the stims and combat shield going up at once. Some people say that this is inefficient, but I'm actually doing a concussive shell variation, which once you start the concussive shell and the stims finish at the exact same time. So this is a more efficient build if you're going up against a TVP player as well. This union worker is still at work, and we're still just pumping out units. I don't move out until all of them are done. That's actually a bad thing to do. You want to... Damn it. I don't know what I'm hitting, but definitely hitting shit. I'm not even on my keyboard, so I don't know how this is happening. But you should move out when you're about 20, probably about 20 seconds to 10 seconds before the research is actually done. That way your units are already nearly at their base, and then every upgrade kicks in for you to have a stronger timing push. I just take out rocks just for the fun of it, because really what I'm going to plan on doing is take the gold really fast. And that's a map-specific thing. Even though I take this expansion first, I then think I expanded the gold. And I'm just moving up my units just as you normally would. If you're going against normally everyone, you saw this one SCV, I didn't do it, but I brought it along with. You run up the ramp with this one SCV. This SCV gives you information to say, is it okay for my units to run up here? Since you're running up a ramp, you don't have vision of the top of their base, so any AoE units like a Hellion or even bunkers, if they're walled off, you can run directly in those bunkers. Those bunkers are going to get a lot of free hits, and you're going to start losing units. If they just have bunkers, put your marauders in the front, stim them up, target down the bunkers, and you should have so much DPS that it's extremely hard for a Terran player to repair them. If you're doing this against a Protoss player, when you're looking for with this SCV is to see if they have sentries. If they have sentries ready, they're going to cut this army in half, and they're going to hold it off extremely easily, and then they're going to kill you, because that's what Protoss do. If they do have sentries, you can just try to set up a contain with these units right here so they're not totally dead, because you should have a far superior, if not a good valued army compared to what they're going to have. in which then you're going to buy time for this expansion to finish up. And as I talked about before, the triangularity, offense beats defense, and defense beats power up. Nope, I said that completely wrong. Defense beats offense, offense beats powering up, and powering up beats defense. So what you're doing is you're doing an extremely strong offensive build, in which then you're taking a really late expansion. But what you're going to punish is if they took an expansion. You're going to just demolish that expansion, and then you're going to try to get that powering up of getting that expansion up to then get a lot more money to then power up to usually medevacs is what you do, because I mean, you can tech up to tanks, but medevacs work the most, have the most synergy with a heavy bio kind of build. I actually dick around for another 20 minutes, which I'm not going to go through. But that's effectively how I would explain to someone, even a gold player, how to do the 3-racks. Because all you really have to do is, I have my screen positioned just like this, and I can look at the production of my command center to see if I need to build more SCVs, to see if I need to build more Marines, build more Marauders, see if my upgrades are going on, and making sure that my Union worker is working. I have not moved my single screen, and a lot of low-level players have a lot more difficulty once they have to start jumping around a whole lot, like constantly changing their screen to make sure upgrades are going on eBay, to making sure that their natural is up, making sure that they're transferring SCVs, getting additional gases, checking how many SCVs are on gases, and so on and so forth. So this is the most easy, broken down 3-racks build that I could possibly think of. It never stops SCV production. You have a shit ton of Marines, you have a shit ton of Marauders, and you even get concussive shell, stim, and combat shield. So that was just kind of a venting kind of session. Again, for people who are just logging in, I was mainly just explaining this 3-racks because when I'm casting the CSL and I see a Terran player 3-racks and they do it inefficiently, it just bothers the hell out of me. So this is showing the build order of the supply depots, the barracks, the research, and I even explained a little bit of the theory behind why you do it in that order and why it's the most efficient. Now, especially if you broke up this wall, you could have brought all of your SCVs with this thing, and that's probably the most common thing to do against a Zerg player, especially if you have any scouting information that they don't have banelings. Pulling all of these SCVs are going to take so many shots from their Zerglings, their Roaches, that your Marines and Marauders are going to stay alive longer. They'll even take shots from the Spine Crawlers to then just completely destroy them, that it's not even going to be close, and then they're going to say something about Terran being OP, bullshit, blah, 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 blah. Except if they built Banelings, it would stop it, but that's fine. There's counters to everything. I'm not saying this is the perfect build. I randomly do it. It's a low percentage time that I do this build, but I do this build a lot actually in team games, since usually I use my 3-racks to defend my allies while they either take an extremely fast expansion, they're powering up, and I'm playing that defensive role to stop our opponent's offensive plays. And since I never stop SCV production when I do take my base, I can transfer half of my SCVs, and then I have essentially 2 saturated bases. And then you keep building SCVs, because I like Terran builds that go up to 3 base, and then ultimately 4 once you start mining out your natural. But that's just how I play Terran. And ultimately, what I'll be talking about every week in Terran It Up is different ways to play Terran, but you need to find your own style. At the beginning of this cast, when we looked over Outplayed's game, I said that he does a really phenomenal job with tanks and everything else. I rarely build tanks. I only build tanks to play that defensive role to stop any tank timing push, because I think your own siege tanks is the best way to stop a siege timing push. Other than that, I go mass Marauders, and then ultimately, if I can, once I have air control, I go BCs. I just love that play. Does it have faults? Oh yeah. If you're caught out of position once, you're dead. But that's just my style of kind of play. So I'm going to leave this replay and just kind of answer anyone's questions that they have at either the last replay or what I just talked about with the 3 racks. Or if anyone wants to start coaching, I'll probably be on for... I've almost gone an hour. An hour is kind of like a good breaking point, but I might just kind of be around a little longer. Just kind of dicking around. So no question. And I think that's an extremely easy build, and I recommend it too, especially if you're golden under. And if you're golden under, I would just do it against every matchup. Why I recommend that is because it's very few things to worry about, and what you're going to start learning is what that unit composition is good at. You're also going to start working on refinement because you're doing it over and over and over again, even against every matchup. You're going to learn kind of that experience and have that feeling of like, whoa, I had so many Marines. Maybe if I didn't build as many Marines, I could have expanded faster to then do even a stronger push afterwards. And you're going to figure out kind of little things like that, and ultimately you're going to find your style. You might find that you don't like to build any Marauders. Not building Marauders, that means you have more minerals to get a faster command center. Or maybe you don't even want to go command center at all. You can even start teching up on one base to get dropships, and then 3 racks on one base. You barely can support that, but that's a stylistic thing. It's more of an all-in if you're one base, but it's something you can do. So we have another question from Fear Dragon. Can you tell me a bit about gas timings for transitioning out of the 3 racks? For example, going into medevacs, tanks, etc. How do you know when to take your gas? The rule of thumb with Terran of when to take your second gas is when you start your factory. That is the biggest tell. As soon as you start your factory, you should immediately take your gas. So if you were still on that one base play and you wanted to go up to, say, that medevac and push out with stim, combat shield, medevac, you wouldn't make Marauders, since Marauders will give you a little more gas to get a factory up faster, and will give you more minerals to effectively get the factory and everything else up faster, and to start building the refinery. So as soon as you get the 150 minerals and 100 gas, you should pull off one SCV, build the factory. As soon as you have 75 minerals now, go and build that refinery immediately. That's the timing for that one base gas. And that's true with every single tank push. If you're doing 1 racks and then a factory, as soon as you start that factory, take that second gas. That's just the basic rule of thumb. There are some examples in which you stay 1 gas. You can even 1 gas do 1 gas Raven expand for 1 gas. You can do a Banshee play off of 1 gas. That's more telling your opposing player or your opponent that you're going to try to take an earlier expansion, and that's why you're cutting corners. But the rule of thumb is as soon as you start your factory, take that gas. Now to take your 3rd and 4th gas, that is all dependent on what you're going to try to do. Generally, once you have enough SCVs on minerals, normally around 16 SCVs on minerals, then you take your 3rd and 4th gas, and that's 16 SCVs on your natural. Then you take your double gas. Or if you're doing a super gas heavy build, as soon as you take your natural, you take both your 3rd and 4th gases, because gas is much more important to those gas heavy builds than your minerals. So that's effectively when to take your gas. And the super ultra mega standard timing for Terran of when to take your first gas is at 13. I don't like to generally use supply as indicators, but mostly that 13 never changes. So there you have it. Trying to think. If there are any more questions? This is my first time doing this, guys. Hopefully I'm not fucking up too bad.